All right, we good, Taylor? Yes. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the May 1st, 2025 meeting of the Lower Downtown Design Review Commission. It's 8:32. We'll call the meeting to order. We'll get started with commissioner introductions. We'll start with Craig.
Craig Lawrence, owner operator.
Madison Wilson, at large.
Fred Blick, property owner.
Heather Vasquez, chair, practicing architect.
Andy Duckett, MQ Preservation Architect and Co-Chair.
Nick Allen, developer.
Amy Amadon representing Landmark staff, and we have Brittany Bryant hosting the meeting as well online. And before we start, I wonder if I could just quickly recognize our 3 commission members who are having their last meeting with us today as their terms have ended. Jim Graber, who couldn't be with us today, Fred Glick, and Heather Vasquez Johnson. We want to thank you so much for your time and expertise and for representing the community's interests related to Lower Downtown. Thank you. Really enjoyed working with you. Oh, and I have certificates for you to display when you get home.
Okay, well, with that, we will get started. We've got 2 meeting records for approval. We've got the meeting record from March 6th, 2025 and April 3rd, 2025. Does anybody have any corrections for staff on those? Okay, so before we move into anything else, we've got audio tips for anybody joining us virtually up on the screen. For better sound quality, please download Zoom on your desktop, laptop, tablet, or mobile device. Click on audio settings to try adding a background noise suppression and test your speaker and microphone to adjust the maximum volumes. If you are a presenter or public commenter, when it's your turn to speak, to mute or unmute, click on the microphone icon at the bottom of the screen, and expanding that menu will reveal additional options to select your devices. If you're using iPods or any kind of headset versus your laptop, and then also test your speakers and adjusting their volumes. And if you continue to have audio challenges, we recommend switching to phone for audio. Okay, moving on, we've got an open public comment period. There is nobody here in person in the audience from the public. So if you are joining us virtually and you would like to speak about anything general and not specific projects, please raise your hand. I'm seeing none from Taylor, so we will close the public comment period and move into our consent agenda. Consent agenda will announce the items that we have on the consent agenda. If any commissioners would like to move those items from consent agenda to design review, they will let us know. If there's any conflicts of interest, that commissioner will leave the room, and then we'll take a motion and vote. And if your project is approved on the consent agenda, you are free to leave the meeting and enjoy your day. So we have 1 item on the consent agenda today. It's item number 2025-COA-246, 1400 16th Street, 16 Market Square for an upper story wall sign. Would anybody like to move this from the consent agenda onto design review? Okay. Seeing lots of no's, would somebody care to make a motion?
Sure. I'll do it. Let's see here. I guess the motion is I move to approve the consent agenda. Can I add this item?
Yeah, just add the item.
Okay, and I move to approve the consent agenda for item number 2025-COA-246 for 1400 16th Street, 1600 Market Square, upper story wall sign.
Great, thank you, Nick. Do we have a second?
So.
Okay, thanks, Fred. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, congratulations. If you're joining us, your project has been approved unanimously. And that closes our consent agenda. We don't have any design review items today, so we will move into business items. And this is the annual election of the chair and vice chair. So we've got the process up on screen. It's very similar. We'll announce that item. Staff will introduce it. If we've got questions, we can ask questions of staff. I don't think we'll have public comment on who our chair or vice chair will be, but if anybody would like to speak, they have 2 minutes. And then we can take a deliberation, motion and vote. So our first business item, election of chair and vice chair.
And obviously Heather is currently chair and Andy is currently vice chair. We do not have any new members appointed yet by city council, so this is our group, right?
Well,
And
by the
Mr.
mayor's
Knox.
office, other than Madison.
I'm
yes.
sorry, by the mayor.
Yeah.
Other than Madison, who's here
Yeah.
with us now.
Yes, this is our group.
I would nominate if you accepted Andy's chair.
I would agree with that. I would
Yeah.
second that.
Second that motion.
You can do it as one motion for chair and vice chair, or two separate motions, is up to y'all.
Four of us left. Who's next? You know, me.
Paper, rock, scissors for it.
I'm happy, you got more tenure, I'm
I'll
happy if you wanna be vice chair.
I'll take it. That would be
Alright.
great. Do my best.
You want to make that motion, Fred?
Sure, I move to nominate Andy's chair and Craig as vice chair.
I will second that motion. Don't get to do that very often. Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstained? All right, congratulations, Andy, Craig. Filling in.
And we have recently been polishing our kind of cheat sheet for running the meeting, which we will make sure that you have. Because it's different to be sitting in the hot seat than
Yeah.
to
I know.
be participating as a member.
Like
So
sometimes
thank
you forget things. Great, and then we will move into discussion items. So we've got a couple of things up on the screen today. These are all informal items for discussion. There's no action, so. Is it Brittany or Amy who's leading?
I
this
think
one?
Brittany's gonna lead on the design guidelines.
All right, Brittany, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so we are going to do a small but meaningful update to the design guidelines for Lower Downtown. And we started this process with a conversation with Heather in November to identify what that list would be. So the goal is to commit to these small and meaningful updates and make them happen. And then once they're completed, identify other small but meaningful updates and then make those happen. Instead of trying to overhaul the entire document, we just don't have the staff capacity for that. So we have created a small list. And one of the first things identified on that list was projecting signs. So as you're aware, all projecting signs do come back to the commission for review and approval. And previously, to have a projecting sign in this district, you did have to have a comprehensive sign plan. However, the Denver zoning code has been updated to allow multi-tenant buildings with direct access to the street to have projecting signs without a comprehensive sign plan. So staff are proposing that we can review projecting signs administratively. I know this would be a big change, but we feel that most projecting signs are placed on the consent agenda. We work with all applicants to ensure we get that iconographic sign like you're seeing on the screen here for Upstairs Circus. And if we can't do that, obviously we would forward it to the commission for final review and approval. So provided it meets the design guidelines, we're proposing that this is something we could administratively review and approve. So our next proposal is related to upper story wall signs. So the design guidelines currently require that all upper story wall signs are subject to commission approval. And we are also proposing that these be administratively reviewed and approved by staff. So the design guidelines do currently require that if you have an upper story wall sign, you must have a comprehensive sign plan in place. This is not something that the Denver zoning code requires. It is something that is just in the design guidelines. However, staff feel that the guidelines already provide pretty clear guidance on what upper story wall signs can be. Essentially, they can only be wall signs, so no projecting signs, nothing like an awning sign on the upper story. Additionally, they're only for signature tenants, which is a tenant that occupies a majority of the building. And then there can be no illumination with those upper story signs. So again, this is something that we're proposing that we could administratively review and approve. We don't review upper story wall signs with the commission, with the Landmark Preservation Commission, so it would be creating more alignment with that process. But also many of these also do end up on the consent agenda, just like the projecting signs. So applicants do tend to wait a while when they are proposing projecting and upper story wall signs, as the commission only meets once a month. And we do have our 4-week filing deadline. So this would facilitate quicker reviews for these projects that do meet the design guidelines and already have really clear requirements on those. So those are our first 2 proposals. Our next proposal is that we can review sidewalk cafes administratively. So currently the design guidelines say that it is a requirement that all railing design be reviewed and approved by the commission, as you can see here on the screen. Again, this is another application type that often ends up on the consent agenda, and applicants do end up waiting a significant amount of time, again, because of the once a month meeting requirement and our 4-week filing deadline. Generally, these are all very straightforward. They don't attach to the buildings. They're generally in that federal green or some other neutral color. Again, this is an application type that doesn't require review before the Landmark Preservation Commission. So again, it would be creating more alignment with that. So this is another application type we are proposing could be administratively reviewed by staff to help lighten the commission's workload.
Can I interrupt for one moment just to clarify, and this is addressed in the memo. We're proposing, of course, that we would be able to review and improve things that clearly comply with the guidelines. If there's any question, it's going to come to you. And for instance, we've had a couple of sidewalk cafes recently. One had kind of a raised platform. I brought a project that had a heavy canopy overhanging it that was kind of projecting into the sidewalk, and those sort of more complicated proposals, we would still come to you for the decision. It's just when something is so straightforward and there, it seems like a path that would be appropriate would be a staff review that we're proposing a change.
So the next item we want to look at is balconies in the design guidelines. So for existing historic buildings, we don't have a lot of guidance on balconies. We have this one guideline that is 1.1.6 that says preference new balconies shall be prohibited on primary facades and rooftop additions. And that is the only guidance that the Lower Downtown Design Guidelines provides for balconies. Of course, the Lower Downtown Design Guidelines are supplemental to the general guidelines, but the Lower Downtown Design Guidelines are very prescriptive on balconies on new buildings. So we don't feel that this aligns very well. So you can see guideline 5.3.3, which states that balconies cannot be a dominant feature of the facade. They shall be located above the building base. They shall contribute to the horizontal and vertical expression of the building. Balconies shall not be continuous across the facade. Railings on balconies shall be transparent. Balconies shall not be placed on primary facades below 55 feet. Balconies shall not exceed 10 feet in length. Balconies shall not be set back into the facade of the building. And then balconies shall not project more than 5 feet from the facade. So some of these are pretty straightforward updates that we know we want to make to the design guidelines based on commission discussion. For example, the balcony shall not project more than 5 feet from the facade. It has come to our attention that that doesn't meet ADA clearance. So that is a update we definitely want to make to these requirements. However, some of these other guidelines don't necessarily provide as clear of direction as we would maybe like. For instance, balconies shall be transparent. We're not entirely sure what this language exactly means. It's very vague. It could mean that the railing has to be glass, or that could be partially transparent. Additionally, we often apply these guidelines to balconies on historic buildings. And for a historic building, it's likely that we would want a more traditional baluster, but again, we don't have a lot of guidance to adequately assess what transparent means. So that is definitely something we want to look at. We also want to look at this requirement that balconies shall not be placed on primary facades below 55 feet. And it somewhat does tie into the preference too that balconies shall not be set back into the building facade. So it is unclear to staff where this requirement came from, and it's also unclear to us if it's consistent with the district. So this is something that we do want to look at a little more closely and put some study into where balconies are below 55 feet. So that is not something that we have clear guidance on at this moment. Additionally, the commission has reviewed some newer infill projects lately where they have integrated balconies as part of the architecture that aren't necessarily projecting, but do help activate the street, particularly when they are housing and creating some outdoor space. So we want to look at why we have this requirement that balconies have to project from the facade. Heather did let us know that with below 55 feet, it may be an issue with other city agencies and encroachment into the right of way, as we encourage most of our buildings to be built to the property line. And it could be difficult to coordinate with other city agencies if we're requiring these projecting balconies. And then you would potentially only get a projecting balcony that is a 4 feet encroachment, which again would create conflict with the ADA kind of clearance and turn radius that is required there. So many of these do create tie-ins with one another, and why we want to look at these and amend these balcony requirements. So I don't have anything additional to add on balconies other than it's something that we want to look at closely and continue to study. Our next section is just something we really need to do. The height requirements in the design guidelines don't match the height requirements in the landmark ordinance. So chapter 30 of the Denver Revised Municipal Code. I have just a little snippet of the ordinance language here on the screen. I know it's a lot to read, so don't feel like you need to read it all. But we just need to create this better alignment because applicants come in and they are complying with the height requirements in the design guidelines. And then we have a pre-application meeting with them and have to tell them that that's not exactly correct and that they need to look to the ordinance for their height requirements. They're not totally off, but there are some discrepancies here and there. So we just need to make this cleanup because it is the ordinance is the driving language here. A next one was a requirement that Heather mentioned to us that may be difficult. So we do have for new buildings a requirement that 2/3 of the horizontal and vertical dimensions of a street level facade be transparent. And Heather did mention that for these smaller developments that you're seeing on like a 55 or a 75-foot development lot, that this would be really hard to meet and also create service areas for these types of buildings. So I just put two of these smaller developments that we have in the district up here on the screen. You can see that they are significantly transparent. I did not work on the the Sugar Cube edition, but Jen did, and I think she's at the meeting. I did work on the Seed edition though, and it does have that staircase tower, which created a lot of concern for the commission because it has no transparency. So again, like this is something we want to look at because this building did need to have a service area. And this stair tower was kind of already the best location for it because there is an underground parking here. So, you know, this requirement did create some concerns. I don't know if Jen has anything to add on one of these like smaller developments that she's worked on and that transparency requirement, not to put her on the spot right away.
No comments. Thank you,
Okay.
Brittany.
Thanks, Jen. The next one we want to look at is our lighting requirements. So the guidelines do suggest that all lighting be kept to a relatively low level in keeping with the overall historic character of the district. We don't know what this means. We don't know if that means placement on the building facade or the overall lighting levels in general. We generally enforce it to be facade positions, so around the pedestrian level, as we don't have purview over lighting levels. But there have been some newer projects that have come in the lower downtown district. So this is Dairy Block. You can see they have this lighted art project. It's not necessarily at the pedestrian level, but also the lighting is very low and it's an art feature within the interior of that project. This was really hard to review because of the design guidelines we have for lighting. So we would like to create more alignment with the design guidelines for landmark districts, in which we do address like all kinds of special event lighting. There's just much more guidance on lighting. So that is some alignment we would like to explore a little bit more for this district, as the guidelines here are very vague. Our next one is looking at rooftop additions. So the design guidelines have a preference that rooftop additions should be set back a minimum of 15 feet from the building facade. We generally strictly enforce this 15 feet, but it is just a preference and not a requirement or what we would call a standard. We feel that this 15-foot setback is pretty significant. Most of the buildings within lower downtown that are historic are no more than 55 feet in height. So if you start to encroach closer to 15 feet, you will get more visibility. And we do see a lot of these rooftop additions on the lower one-story buildings that we have on the, I guess, more north side of the district as it transitions into around the Ballpark Historic District. So it is difficult to enforce this 15-foot requirement, although we do really try to do that. So that is something we want to look at. Also the height that says that additions shall be no higher than 20 feet, but a maximum height of 15 feet. So again, like applicants do tend to push those height limits and what that is measured from. So we would like to provide some additional clarity there. And then relating to rooftop additions, we don't really have a good definition of what a rooftop addition is. We have this penthouse, residential penthouse, mechanical penthouse definition within our lower downtown design guidelines. And it generally states a structure on the roof of a building usually has its own roof, may or may not contain habitable space, often hides building equipment set back from the roof edge. And then for residential penthouse, it just says, see this definition. And then it says a residential penthouse is any rooftop containing habitable space. So we just want to create better alignment with these definitions with the zoning code, as and this is where sometimes people do challenge us over our definition of penthouse, mechanical penthouse, and those things. So creating better alignment here will help developers and staff and the commission when reviewing these items. The next thing we want to look at is potentially retiring the streetscape standards. And we could do this one or two ways. We could totally retire this document, or we could take some of the relevant things from this document that we still use and incorporate them into our general guidelines. And I will say, mostly the one relevant thing that we still use relates to sidewalk cafes in terms of railing design. And as you know, as we mentioned earlier, we do want to create some updates to the sidewalk railing cafe guidelines there, so we could incorporate it there. But a lot of the guidelines provided in here don't meet current city standards for in terms of what the forester likes to see, what right of way likes to see for that looking like. So we're not proposing totally like not reviewing the right of way. It's just that this document doesn't align with best city practices currently for the right of way, and it creates a lot of conflict. So we are looking at potentially retiring this or potentially incorporating some of the more relevant things into the guidelines. Again, this document dates from 1991, so it is one of our older guidance documents. And then I didn't make a slide for this, but we do want to do some general cleanup to the design guidelines throughout the document. And I'm sure you noticed as I was flipping through and had some of the guidelines on the screen, it references the Lower Downtown Design Review Commission as the Lower Downtown Design and Demolition Review Board. That is no longer your name, so we want to make those general cleanups. The current guidelines are pretty bare bones. They don't have any graphics or diagrams. So we're looking at if we could potentially add any graphics, diagrams, update the layout to potentially make it more user-friendly. And then we would also like to strike through language that throughout the document that isn't particularly useful. So for example, there is a statement in the document that say 16th Street mall tenant shall be retail or art galleries. We have no purview over use, as you know, can't require that. So that is something that we would like to look at, is just making general cleanups. So if the commission is amenable to this list, we would like to get started. Of course, we're happy to take your feedback on any of these items, but we do feel like this is something we could accomplish in a relatively short time frame, but also provide some meaningful updates to the design guidelines.
Thank you. I have a couple of quick comments and questions. Appreciate this, because I do think a lot of this is really necessary, and I think it'll make everybody's lives easier. Just overarchingly, I do want to sort of recognize the work that staff has done over the last many years that I've been involved. Since that seed building project, things have moved along in a lot of ways. And I think this is in keeping with the work staff has done to bring consistency to the process, both administratively and at the commission level, and helping to keep the commission within its purview, which I'm not sure historically, back in the day, it always did. Two specific comments. One about the signs, very much support that. One question I have is, does it make any sense for the commission review to be either an appeal process or at applicant request? And I'm thinking about signs that maybe don't meet the guidelines that staff is getting significant pushback on, that perhaps having it go to the commission, either in an appeal or staff being able to say, look, we're gonna have to say no. If you would like, you can ask and we'll take it to the commission, just to help back up staff in that sense.
That is what we do. If someone, we aren't the final say on most anything. If someone would like your opinion, if they have a more creative idea, we bring them to you.
Right. Okay.
Can
And
I
then,
clarify something?
Yeah.
Because staff can't say no, it's not an appeal process. The commission is just the next step in that process. So-
Yeah, you're the final say, so we don't like necessarily say like, oh, you appeal to the commission, but we generally, when we're guiding applicants, we're like, we as staff have to strictly interpret the guidelines. This is our interpretation. You can take it to the commission, which is a public body who can discuss these applications. But generally, like, this is we want to do this for the upper story let me rephrase. The upper story wall signs and projecting signs that a lot of the CSPs are still in place, so they would be meeting the CSPs. Many of those CSPs are probably not going to go anywhere. So it's just really kind of taking one more additional step out of their process that they have to do when they're meeting their comprehensive sign plan and the design guidelines, which have been incorporated into the comprehensive sign plan. But again, if they have proposed something like really unique, we can always forward that to the commission.
but just to clarify, but if you have an administrative review process, you can only say yes, you can't say no?
Correct.
Okay.
Can I add a question or ask a question related to that? In your review process, is there a check and balance between the staff member who's reviewing it and they're saying yes, but what's the check against them saying yes when it's not necessarily appropriate? Is there a discussion or a check?
We have meetings at least twice a week where we talk about most all projects as a group.
Got it. Got it. So when staff says yes, it's as a group that we all agree. Got it. Thank you.
Unless it's very straightforward and we're like, you want to replace your mechanical? Check.
Got it. Makes sense.
One other is, as you consider the streetscape guidelines, my suggestion would be, because I think it's important, because it is a problem, is tree pit fences and getting some fairly clear, straightforward guidelines that can be administratively approved very quickly and easily, because right now it feels, at least it has felt in the past, like that is a lot more work than it should be. And if we want greenery in Lodo, we've got to start putting tree fences around it, because the dogs just kill everything.
Yeah, and those have been a challenge, as you know, Fred, because we have like virtually no guidelines on that. And it just like these 1991 document isn't really meeting current needs whatsoever.
So, but I specifically, if you can include that in that review and get something that can easily be administratively approved, I just think that would be a big win. Thanks.
Yeah, I would add just making sure that that's in consideration of whatever prevailing DOTI regulations for, tier 1 encroachments and different things that govern those types of items. They usually win.
Well, and some of it, as I understand, may not require, depending on how it's installed, may not require an encroachment permit. So it gets a little bit tricky, but making this process easier would be a huge win.
Yeah, I think, and the discussion that I had with staff is just getting those things more in line with the other city agencies that applicants have to work with, in particular DOTI. So making sure that sidewalk standards and all of those things are, yes, we have special conditions in Lodo, like the sandstone street sidewalks and things like that, but getting those things to align more succinctly so that there's not confusion with applicants is kind of the main thing.
Thanks.
I think everything, Brittany, that you've outlined, I agree with. I think it's a great move. My only additional question is, can you guys speak a little to the process that you anticipate for how you're gonna look at the various language, develop new language, and then that review process,
Sure.
including when you bring it to us for approval?
Yeah, so we typically, all design guidelines would have to be adopted by you as the commission. So we typically do a public outreach process before we start drafting. With the community, usually the first step in that is introducing that process to the commission. So that's today, what we're doing is kind of identifying that. We generally, we as staff identify what we can work on in terms of like what will be meaningful, but also achievable within a certain time frame with our workload. So like we are flexible on updates to this list, but we feel like this is something we can definitely achieve within a reasonable time frame. So then we start community outreach on these topics. It will probably be a smaller community outreach than we do for like the general design guidelines because this is one specific historic district, one neighborhood versus the other design guidelines, which have to apply to like 63 historic districts. Then we start the drafting process and we draft internally amongst a small team. So that small team here will likely be myself, Crystal, Marquez, Amy, potentially Jen if she's interested, as we're the most familiar with lower downtown. And then we have the rest of Landmark staff review it and decide, you know, like, is this ready for public review draft? And then we put it on our webpage for public review draft, get public comments in, assess those public comments, and then forward it to the commission for review. We do go through a public hearing process. So generally speaking, we would do another discussion item with you as the commission, and then have the public hearing. For certain things, like depending on what we're getting in terms of like feedback from Dottie, let's just say, or like the balconies that we want to study. Again, we may do some smaller discussion items with you, the commission, as we're going through this process, just to be like, we're really struggling with this. What are your thoughts? So that's generally how we do the updates. If I missed something, Jen or Amy, please let me know.
I think the only thing to add is we started this kind of joking that this is a 10 things I hate about you process. What is a group of changes that everyone can agree are causing frustration or confusion and would really be helpful? And, you know, we don't want to overpromise because as Brittany just described, this isn't that simple to put these into effect, but we want to chip away at it. And as we make progress, we'll come to you as we did to Heather to say, what are your 10 things? What's next?
Thank you.
Yeah, and we did work with Heather for this list specifically, just because we kept hearing like the same things over and over again and wanted to make sure we were aligning with what the commission was hearing too.
We try to identify things that we talk about a lot and debate a lot when we have design review and things like that. That was a big piece of it, as well as just kind of getting the guidelines up to snuff with where other standards are, like, you know, making sure if you have a new build and you're putting balconies on that you're not violating other laws and requirements like ADA, because you can only do a 5-foot deep balcony. So things like that that help make everything kind of more in line with other standards, but also the things that we continually kind of talk about and debate as we go through projects. And then thoughts for staff?
Thank you guys for taking that on and
Of
a little
course.
big task. So,
I wanted to do this before Heather's last meeting to show where we're
This is my legacy now.
Burn it all down.
Build it up, don't burn it down. Do we have any other discussion items today or?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jen has a presentation too.
Yeah, just briefly, I'll go over the chair so that I'm on the screen. that on the agenda, so I apologize.
It on. Sometimes it goes to sleep if it's.
It's on, it's just,
Like, we can see it up there, but.
yeah. Yeah,
Oh, I may have messed it up because I gave you a remote control. Sorry.
oh,
Let me take that off
yeah, thank you.
for a second.
It's just not letting me do the camera.
Yeah.
Literally, this part is longer than my presentation, so.
Okay. I've stopped remote control.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. And it's just a couple slides, so Brittany, I'll just let you know when to move it.
Okay, sounds good.
So I was meeting with the Landmark Preservation Commission over the past couple weeks, and they, one of them asked me, hey, I heard there was a reorganization. Can you tell us more about it? So I thought I would share it with you all because I'm going to share it with them next week. So there was a reorganization. Previously, this all went into effect last Monday. Previously, the way this process or this CPD, Community Planning and Development, was structured to have, we have an executive director and senior and executive leadership that are overseeing the whole department. And then we had planning services, which is the planning department. So regulatory planning, planning and implementation, and landmark preservation. We had development services, which was all of the plan review, permit review, and inspections. And then performance and operations, which is finance, accounting, HR, like all of the things that are not permit review, inspections, planning. Next slide. So landmark preservation was under planning services. We had two teams that were under me, the planning, the landmark manager. We had the planning and regulatory team, which we affectionately call planetary. They do designations, they work on plans, they work on our Denver in Context project. We're working with the American Indian and Indigenous Peoples community right now on a historic context. They work on tax credits, things like that. Then there's the design review team, which works on design review. You all are very familiar with these folks. So Amy and Brittany and Crystal and Jesse, Andrew. And then we're working on design review and demolition review. So we were under planning services. Next slide. There was a reorganization that went into effect on April 21st. So planning became planning and policy. Then the development services team broke out into several different groups. So there's zoning and landmark plan review, building plan review, building and zoning inspections, site development and neighborhood design. So that's your site development plan process. The strategy, operations, and performance, that's formerly the performance and operations. Thank you. Yes, so Taylor's in that group. And then the public affairs and communications. That's, so those are now the bigger buckets that are under the executive leadership team and senior leadership team. Next slide. So the landmark team was divided into two different divisions within that. So the planning and regulatory team is within planning and policy, and the design review team is with the zoning and landmark plan review. We are still one team. We are still sitting together. This is not changing our work program at all. We are within two different divisions, but we are still one team. So wanted to share that with you all. There will be efficiencies in this. There will be some hiccups as we try to figure things out, but that's where we are. There's the presentation. Questions? Comments?
Yes, but I don't want to go.
I think we ourselves are still trying to figure out where those efficiencies are and what we want to gain from this. I will say in general, we're just communicating more with the zoning group to try to troubleshoot things that we might take through and approve at design review and then fail at permit, which isn't what we want to do. So there's just more dialogue and more, I think, depth of understanding between the two groups. Just the general goal being, as you've probably heard, we have a new permit review commitment to 180 days to issue permits, which is a whole nother topic that needs some more vetting, but it's all in that same idea that we're going to just try to make the process of getting someone to what they would like to build a little easier. Wish us luck.
I want to throw out to this group, I sit as a co-chair on a technical advisory board, working with Jill and Robert Peak on that exact thing, bringing kind of industry perspective on how to build efficiencies. So feel free to email me as you have specific issues. It helps to have specific projects, particularly those in the community that are touching a lot of different projects. When something happens, feel free to just blast it over to me and say, hey, this was kind of a inefficient thing that happened. I can bring it to the committee and we can figure out how to fix it. So blast me anytime.
Careful what you wish for. All right, thank you. Well, if there is no more discussion items, I will close the meeting at 9:18.
Congratulations on two of your last meetings and Madison's first.
Congrats.